on is just this one?
No, आफै अन हुन्छ
It's done.
हामीले बोल्न सुरु गरेपछि उनीहरूले अन गरिदिन्छ कि उता
के अरे किन गरेको भन्ने हिसाबमा कुरो गर्छु
One by one, होइन?
अनि त्यसपछि म स्पिकरहरूको लागि इन्ट्रोड्युस गराउँछु अनि त्यसपछि महेश्वर सर तपाईँ मन्जित दाई र त्यसपछि श्रेया कन्टिन्यू उसमा जाँदा हुन्छ है
श्रेयालाई दिउँ मलाई लाग्छ
हुन्छ
पछाडि पारेर
हुन्छ Good evening, respected all. Welcome to this press conference. We'd like to appreciate your presence despite your busy schedule. This press conference is organized to share the Nepal's update of negotiations in first week of UNFCCC COP25. We have 4 speakers today. Let me introduce our speakers. We have Dr. Maheshwar Dhakal in my right side from Ministry of Forest and Environment. We have Mr. Kailash Pokharel from Ministry of Finance. Similarly, we have climate expert and advisor of Clean Energy Nepal, Mr. Manjeet Dhakal, and youth representative of Nepal, Ms. Shreya in my left side. Ms. Casey is National Coordinator of Nepalese Youth for Climate Action, National Youth Network in Nepal, which working in climate change. Today we are going to organize this press conference to share the updates and what Nepal has focused during the first week of this UNFCCC negotiation process. So let me ask our speakers to share the update from update of this first week of this COP. So first of all, I would like to request Dr. Maheshwar Dhakal from Ministry of Forest and Environment to share what was the focus and what was the outcome of this COP during the first week. Dr. Dhakal.
Thank you very much. This is Maheshwar Dhakal. This is Maheshwar Dhakal, National Focal Point of Nepal to UNFCCC. This COP25 is organizing here in Madrid, the beautiful city of Spain. And government of Nepal is a party of UNFCCC. We are heavily engaging with different negotiation forces of the COP. Basically, a number of agenda are the priority of Nepal. Our priority is Nepal is mountainous country and one of the landlocked country in South Asia, and very much popular with mountainous regions, including Mountain Everest, in Nepali called Sagarmatha, is highly vulnerable due to climate adverse effects. In order to address our climate effects, Nepal engaging different area, including the adaptations, climate finance, technology, transparency framework, and many others. Basically, our colleagues, our delegate colleagues, they are engaging in Article 6 and what type of mechanism and what type of approach should we need to encourage the carbon trade in international market. Basically, how the developing countries like Nepal can benefit from this process. And similarly, the Article 6 should not undermine the environmental integrity while trading the carbon in the international market. And basically, developing countries, they are highly vulnerable and they have to benefit it. And the money, whatever income from the carbon trade after this, all the negotiation process, it should go to the local communities, and they have to be benefited. This is our point. But at the same time, Nepal is proposing one very special agenda together with other parties. As I already mentioned that South Asia, especially Hindu Kush Himalayan region, is highly vulnerable, and this area should be considered as a special needs and special circumstances of the vulnerability like other parts of the world. And Nepal, together with Bhutan and Myanmar, other countries, we are proposing to the presidency that this agenda should be included in this COP and need to be discussed. Basically, while coming to this COP, Nepal is progressing a number of achievements. You can see 45% of the forest coverage we have, which has a huge chunk of the carbon. We have the ability to sink and sequestrate from the atmosphere. Similarly, Nepal is moving forward to promote the e-mobility. The government of Nepal is allocating more than 30 million US dollar within this fiscal year to promote the e-mobility. At the same times, we also endorse new climate change policy, which integrates all segments of the society, including agriculture and food security, forest biodiversity and watershed, energy and water resources, cultural and natural heritage, urban and rural settlement, infrastructure with industry and transport, climate-induced disasters, and sanitation and health. These are the 8 areas which government of Nepal giving the highest priority. Similarly, we are giving the side-by-side the cross-cutting issues, gender and justice and inclusiveness, livelihood and governance, research and technology considering to the young generations, and the awareness and education of the local communities, and finally climate finance. These are the areas. And similarly, other policy document, NAP is under formulation process, and NDC, the government of Nepal is going to revise. And this COP clearly asks the parties to be a more ambitious NDC, not just being ambitious, is very ambitious. That's why Nepal is also planning to submit our NDC with ambitious, but we are asking international communities, parties, especially developing countries, who are the real emitter of the carbon, should declare and secure the long-term finance, and then it will be easier for us to be ambitious NDC together with other developing countries. These are the plans and these are the activities we are focusing in this COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dhakal. Let me ask Mr. Kailash Pokharel from Ministry of Finance. Sir, what was the major agenda regarding the climate finance, and how Nepal is dealing the issue of climate finance in this COP?
Thank you. I am from Ministry of Finance. I am head of the climate finance unit in the ministry, and I am leading the climate finance matters in this COP25 in Madrid. As we all know that this COP25 is being held at the critical time of the history, because it's the next year is the 2020. So 2020 is a 2020 is a 1 decade of commitments we have to fulfill. So every country has committed through their NDC, nationally determined contribution, that they have set the certain target. To fulfill those targets, we need to mobilize. All countries are seeking the resources, that is finance. So this is very important agenda, and at this time, the negotiation is being progressed, is being done. It has not concluded. Then how to secure, how much we have already mobilized in terms of finance, and how much we need, what is the gap. So this is a tough discussion is going on. The standing committee, the certain committees are trying to have the status report, for example, SCF, of what is the gap before 2020. And after that, we can move ahead from the next year, that what we require for the days, for the years to come. So this is the very critical time that we are dealing with. As we all know that the developing countries are pushing for the developed country parties that they have to fulfill their commitment of $100 billion each year by 2020. So this is, but still we have to see the reports, what has been mobilized so far. And this is the one agenda. And another is we don't have at this moment, we don't have any climate finance definition. What is climate finance? So we are just pushing to have this climate finance definition, even the scope, the discussion is continuing. Unless we have this climate finance definition, our data will not be robust. Because Nepal have tried our best to capture all the climate-related expenditure through our own system. We have already implemented the climate code in our national budget system where we are trying it. But the data, we need to, if we need to have at least one universal definition and the national definition, then only we can capture data properly. So this is the matter we are just pushing in such a global forum. So, and another matter this week we have been discussing that through this convention and mechanisms there is a very good progress. The operational entities have been working, like Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, and Adaptation Fund Board. So these all the operational entities are working and they are mobilizing funds. So there are some operational issues, number of issues, like for example, Green Climate Fund is asking for their more secure mobility to the countries, like they are asking for the privilege and immunity matters, and also many countries are asking Green Climate Fund that your procedure have to be more simplified in terms of mobilizing the resources in a robust way. And also they are doing entrusted to have more accredited entities in the days to come to follow the country system. And another matter just we have been discussing is how this global environment facilities working, because a number of countries have raised the issue of discrimination to access to the fund. And this is being under discussion that in our group through G77 plus China and the LDC that we have been grouped into, that we are pushing for the no discrimination should be there because it's a climate matters. So that discussion is continuing to equally access the fund by all the member countries of the party. And another matter is the Adaptation Fund Board. Currently, there are a number of, the members are having a little bit more from the developing countries, so that developing countries' voice should be reflected properly. Now the discussion is continuing that to change the structures. So the developing countries' parties are pushing, so not to change the structure. Current structure is functioning, this is well structured, and this is well functioning. Now the developed country parties are pushing a little bit to change, to get the more seats by themselves. So this is continuing, and it has not been concluded. So we are working hard to pushing our own agenda forward. So let's see, and we'll come maybe the later days to have a more clear picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pokharel. Now we have Youth Representative Ms. Shreya Kesi from Nepal. Ms. Kesi, may I ask you, what was the major agenda of the youth, and why the climate change negotiation and the COP process is important for the youth?
Thank you, Dai. Namaste, I'm Shreya Kesi, National Network Coordinator for Nepalese Youth for Climate Action. We are also a member of YONGO and Steering Committee for Cancer Nepal. I am here through the Youth Climate Scholarship Project, which was provided to 14 different scholars throughout the globe. It's inevitable that Nepal has been facing the brunt of climate change that it never caused. So it's very crucial for us to engage in climate action from local to global arena. Here I will be highlighting about the youth engagement and our priorities in this year COP. 4 years after getting the Paris Agreement approved, it seems that current places under the nationally determined contributions fall far short of where the world needs to go to achieve its climate goals and commitment. More urgency, more ambition, and more action should guide the next NDCs and all climate action plans. and long-term strategies update in order to avoid the Earth's worst crisis ever in human history. This year, COE, Conference of Youth 15, welcomed 400 different youths from 85 different countries, where we conducted several capacity building trainings and prepared ourselves to engage in COP25. COE 15 outcomes were successfully delivered to the presidency at the opening ceremony of the Young and Future Generations Day. The hot cake issue for this year has been NDC, common timeframes, and climate finance for us. We have continuously been engaging in negotiation, high-level discussion, and open dialogue with the global leaders present here in COP. Myself, I was moderating the youth briefing with the UN Executive Secretary, where we discussed the youth things and the constituency frameworks. In these 4 days of COP, we youth have agreed and prepared the following outcomes, which I would like to share briefly here. We request parties to urgently update or revise their NDCs for 2020, reflecting the best available science and including S to enhance their ambition, provide support, and means for implementation for those on the front line of climate change impacts according to the Paris Agreement timeline. We urge parties to include ambitious and concrete economy-based wide emission reduction targets and sector-specific ones, including but not limited to agriculture, energy, industry, buildings, S, transportation, forests, and oceans. We call upon parties to create a structured platform for inclusion of youth and youth movements into the consultation and design process for NDCs. We urge to appoint an S, Action for Climate Empowerment, national focal point with sufficient resources in all the parties. We call upon the GCF to establish a youth readiness program, youth inclusive financing, direct access of small grants, schemes for youth and representation of young leaders on the board, which will enhance intergenerational equity and enhance ambition. We also encourage unequal balance between mitigation and adaptation financing. To develop a solution-oriented framework that promotes a system of formal and informal education on adaptation in their countries. Directly engage children and youth, supporting their projects and establishment of intergenerational dialogue, taking into account the Adapt for Our Future project. Lastly, we invite policymakers to join youth, farmers, women, indigenous people, and all the peoples in the field, as it offers holistic benefits and it helps for better understanding of the urgency for political measures to match the grassroots efforts being made. We thank and appreciate all those who has been continuously been engaged in climate action, whether it be youth, CSOs, or policymakers, for being able to achieve the progress so far. But that's not definitely enough. We need to continue with more enhanced ambition and actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Now I'm coming to Mr. Manjeet Dhakal. Mr. Dhakal, how this COP will help to make our vulnerable communities of Nepal to more resilient and more climate adaptive. How this COP's outcome help us in Nepal?
Thank you, Lalmani. It's a privilege to be here at this press conference where the outcome of the negotiation and the priorities of Nepal are being shared. With my other affiliation back home, I'm also involved with the university in Nepal and also advising ministry on a number of other different roles. Before we came here for the COP, the Ministry of Environment, led by Dr. Maheshwar, we prepared the status paper for Nepal for COP25, where a number of priorities were highlighted, and those priorities were prioritized based on the needs of how the issues of Nepali people, the local communities, and the mountainous communities can be addressed. In terms of the key priority, as it was said earlier, and which also helps the local community to address the problem, the 1.5 degree, limiting the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is one of the key. The negotiations under Article 6 should not undermine in terms of raising ambition and should contribute to the limiting temperature rise, and also the loss and damage has a different context that the people in our communities, the people in the mountainous communities in Nepal has been addressing, which we can get through this COP, and the delegation of Nepal has very actively engaged. That's what I have seen in the different negotiation forum. Just one fact, what we have in terms of context, even if the temperature rise is limited to 1.5 degree century, about 1/3 of the ice in the Hindu Kush Himalaya will be melting by the end of this century. So this fact has inspired us to involve in this process. This is the fact for which we had to fight limiting the temperature rise and have been requesting the countries to limit their emission because the option that we have in front of us is to adopt with the rising temperature. If we cannot adopt, then the situation that goes beyond the limit of adaptation, we may have to enter to the loss and damage situation, which will be very expensive, which will be very costly for the country like Nepal. So the first objective is to limit the temperature rise, which will help the community, which will help the future generation, the youth, in terms of making this earth livable so that we can hand over this planet to the future generation. So in terms of the key priority and in terms of how what we can achieve through this COP, as it was explained earlier, the focus has been the ambition, the Article 6, the loss and damage, and how finance can be generated to help the vulnerable communities who can adopt and who can take ambitious action in terms of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dhakal. We can take 1 or 2 questions if anybody have. Okay.
Thank you very much to all the panelists here and for a brief update of the COP. So my first question is for Mr. Manjeet Dhakal. We have already spent 4 years after the Paris Agreement, and we only have 1 year to move on the implementation. So how do you see, after 2020, how do you see the implementation of the Paris Agreement in the current progress of international climate change negotiation? So because one of the main point of the Paris Agreement is to limit the global temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And as my knowledge and update, it is very difficult to obtain that in the current global scenario. So how do you see the implementation of the Paris Agreement after 2020? So another question is for Mr. Pokharel, sir. Nepal is we have just received the GCF, we have just received the fund from the GCF, and Nepal is accessing the different fund from different source, international source. Recently, we have updated the climate change policy, and we are now on the process to update the NDC. So for that, for the implementation of NDC, Nepal requires a lot of money, finance to make the Nepal climate resilient. So how do you, how Nepal is trying to access more fund, and based on the international climate change negotiation, how do you see, like, will the future days, we Nepal be able to access the fund that we required to tackle the impact of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We will hear from both Mr. Dhakal and Mr. Pokharel, and I would like to remind you to both speakers, we will have 1 minute to respond to the question.
Thank you, Pradeep. In terms of how the countries are preparing for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, maybe Dr. Maheshwar can explain what Nepal is doing, but Nepal is one among the countries where 60+ countries has presented the list in terms of revising NDC, and even most of these countries are the one who doesn't have much role to do, whose emissions are very low, but has been trying to inspire others to do same. Because if we refer to the recent report published by the UNEP, the emission gap report, country have to reduce the emission by 6.5% every year up to 2030, so that we will be in the track of 1.5 degree. So I think even if Nepal has been doing that, then why can't others? Thank you.
Mr. Pokharel.
Thank you. As you know that next year we will revise our NDC, and we will have a new NDC that will clearly reflect the funding gap, how much we need to fulfill our target. That's why, and the Ministry of Finance is now aware and will be aware of that gap, and then we will mobilize the funding not only from one sources, the multiple sources, including our internal sources. We are also mobilizing our internal sources. We have not captured the data from the private sector sources, how much is being mobilized, we need to do that. And from the foreign sources you mentioned, that we have multiple sources that the global financing facilities are available. We will do that. And then as you know that Nepal stands with all the funding sources that this should be climate fund should be additional, and we also are capturing from all our ODA sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pokharel. Now we are in the end of this conference. Now I'd like to request Dr. Maheshwar Dhakal to share how Nepal is planning for the second week of this COP. So while sharing this plan, I'll also request you to close this conference.
Okay, thank you very much. I think first week is very busy week among the government delegates and all the parties and civil society organizations. But next week is more political week, where ministers from more than 150 countries, they will be here and we will discuss with the political level. Most of the decision, whatever will be decided in the first week, that will be indoors, but remaining issues also discussed in the second week. Nepal is a least developed country and highly vulnerable country. Nepal very much eager to work together with the international communities to address this global agenda. At the same time, Nepal asks the parties to give the special consideration to the developing countries and the seeds who are highly vulnerable in the world, and especially focus to the young people and marginalized people who are really suffering from the climate change vulnerabilities. These are the major areas we have to discuss. And the second week is mostly the political week, and we will hopefully we will take the right decision of this COP by the end of second week. Thank you very much. And I would like to close this conference here. Thank you very much.
Pradeep. Sorry, photo.